The property had always felt like a quiet victory. It sat just outside the polished edges of the neighborhood, where fences grew less uniform and rules began to loosen their grip. The land was older than the community beside it, with trees that had stood long before anyone thought to form a homeowners association. It wasn't just a house, it was space, freedom, and a rare escape from control. But one tree changed everything. It stood near the edge of the property line, tall but hollow, its trunk rotting from the inside out. During storms, it creaked in a way that felt less like nature and more like warning. Branches had already begun to fall, one narrowly missing the driveway. The decision to cut it down wasn't impulsive. It was cautious. Necessary. The tree came down in a single afternoon. By the next morning, everything had shifted. A letter arrived, official, stamped, and cold in tone. It wasn't a warning. It wasn't even a discussion. It was a fine. $10,000. The accusation was clear, unauthorized tree removal in violation of HOA guidelines. The words didn't make sense at first. The property wasn't supposed to fall under HOA authority. That had been confirmed before purchase, buried in documents that had been reviewed carefully. The land existed outside their reach, at least, that's what had been believed. But the letter insisted otherwise. It cited rules, regulations, enforcement codes. It demanded payment within 14 days. It threatened escalating penalties if ignored. Confusion turned into irritation. Irritation into disbelief. How could an organization claim control over land it didn't own? The situation might have ended there, just another bureaucratic mistake, if not for what came next. A second letter arrived 2 days later. This one wasn't just a fine. It was a notice of ongoing penalties. Daily fines. Additional charges. Legal escalation. The tone had shifted from authority to aggression. It no longer felt like an error. It felt deliberate. Looking back at the property line, something became clear. The tree hadn't just been near the boundary. It had been visible, from the neighborhood, from the HOA-controlled homes, from the people who believed the entire area belonged under their rules. To them, the line didn't matter. Control did. And that's when the situation stopped being about a tree. It became something much bigger. The notices didn't stop. They multiplied. Emails followed the letters. Formal language, increasingly urgent. Each message layered on more pressure, more fees, more consequences, more insistence that compliance was not optional. The number climbed quickly. 10,000 became 12. Then 14. Every day added another charge. But the most unsettling part wasn't the amount. It was the certainty behind it. The HOA wasn't acting like it might be wrong. It was acting like it had already won. That confidence raised questions. Documents were pulled out again. Property surveys, purchase agreements, legal descriptions. The boundary lines were clear, precise, and confirmed by multiple sources. The land existed outside HOA jurisdiction. There was no gray area. And yet, the enforcement continued. Then came the visit. A representative arrived unannounced, standing near the edge of the property, inspecting the space where the tree once stood. Notes were taken. Photos captured. The behavior wasn't observational, it was authoritative. As if ownership had already been decided. That moment shifted everything. Because it proved something important. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an overreach. The HOA wasn't confused about the boundary. It was ignoring it. And that changed the approach entirely. The next step wasn't responding. It was preparing. What started as a simple dispute turned into a deeper investigation. The property records were reviewed again, but this time, not just individually. Surrounding parcels were examined. Historical maps were pulled. Older documents revealed something the newer ones didn't emphasize. The neighborhood hadn't always been what it was now. Years ago, before expansion, before uniform homes and strict guidelines, the land had been divided differently. The HOA had grown outward over time, absorbing sections, redefining boundaries, extending influence. But not everything had been absorbed. Some parcels had remained independent. This property was one of them. And buried within older filings was a crucial detail, a formal exclusion. A legal distinction that placed the land permanently outside HOA authority. It wasn't ambiguous. It wasn't outdated. It was still valid. Which raised an even bigger question. If the exclusion was clear, why was the HOA acting as if it didn't exist? The answer came from a closer look at their documents. The HOA's current map showed a simplified boundary, clean lines, uniform zones. But it wasn't accurate. It had been redrawn over time, likely for convenience, possibly for control. And in that redrawing, the independent parcel had been visually absorbed. On paper, it looked like HOA land. In reality, it wasn't. That discrepancy changed everything. Because it meant the fines weren't just wrong. They were baseless. And enforceable only if no one challenged them. The response wasn't emotional. It was precise. A formal letter was sent, not arguing, not negotiating, but presenting evidence. Certified documents. Historical records. Legal descriptions. The exclusion clause highlighted clearly. The message was simple. The property was not under HOA authority. The fines were invalid. And any further enforcement would be considered overreach. The reaction wasn't immediate. But it was noticeable. The daily fines stopped increasing. The emails slowed. For the first time, the certainty on the HOA's side began to crack. But they didn't back down completely. Instead, they escalated differently. A legal notice arrived, less aggressive in tone, but more cautious. It didn't demand payment outright. It suggested resolution discussions. It referenced boundary clarification. The language had changed. Confidence had been replaced with hesitation. Because the situation had shifted from enforcement to exposure. The final turn didn't come from argument. It came from silence. Days passed without new fines. Weeks passed without new threats. The urgency that once defined every communication disappeared completely. Then, a letter arrived. Short. Controlled. Carefully worded. It stated that after review, the HOA would be withdrawing all fines related to the incident. No admission of fault. No apology. Just a quiet retreat. But the impact was clear. $10,000, gone. All penalties, void. Enforcement, ended. And more importantly, the boundary was acknowledged. Not publicly. Not loudly. But officially. The property remained exactly what it had always been, independent. Untouched by HOA control. The tree had been removed for safety. But in the process, something else had been removed too. An assumption. The belief that authority could extend wherever it wanted, unchecked. Because in the end, it wasn't the fine that mattered. It was the line. And once that line was proven, everything changed.